today I am going to talk to you about why I think it's important for you to vote and also how you can get involved in your democracy. So as was mentioned, I've been really involved in my community from a very young age. When I was 3 years old, I went to my very first protest, and I had a little protest sign that said, on one side said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And the other side it said "alive," and it was against nuclear weapons. And let me just show you a little picture of what I might have looked like at that protest. And when I was in grade 2, I founded a club called the ABC Club, and we used to hang out on the jungle gym in the playground, and our goal was to change the world. So I come by this work that I do now for a living very honestly. So I've really always believed that it's really important to get involved in your community, and I've always been super engaged in my community. So I have heard every excuse in the book from my friends and my peers about why they aren't involved. But despite that, and despite having to kind of fight that and defend myself the entire time I was growing up, I still really feel like it's very important to be involved in your community. And by the end of this talk, I hope that I will have convinced you that your vote can actually really make a difference. So before we get to how your vote can make a difference, let's talk a little bit about the problem. So over the last 40 years, in all Western democracies, we've seen a huge decline in voter turnout. So our overall voter turnout in Canada is about 60%. And as I said, in Europe and in the US, we've seen some changes the last 2 elections, but generally there has been a significant decline in the number of people who turn out and vote. Federal elections at the national level, more people vote. Provincial, sometimes lower, and municipal, it's a lot lower. So why is voter turnout going down? Well, voter turnout is going down because of young people. When young people turn 18 years old, they are not opting into the democratic process. So they are deciding not to vote. Now you might think, well, that's not a big deal. You know, when I'm in my 30s, when I'm in my 40s, and I've got the minivan, and the house, and the couple of kids, well, I'm going to start thinking about that kind of stuff. I'm going to start thinking about my community, and I'm going to want to vote. Well, the research shows us that if you don't vote the first 2 elections where you're eligible to vote, the likelihood is that you will never vote throughout the rest of your life. So we're looking at in 20 or 30 years in Canada that we would only have about 40% of the entire population that takes the time to decide who our leaders are. Now, as far as I'm concerned, youth engagement and having young people vote is not just about how nice it is that young people care and that they're involved. We're talking about the real health of our democracy far into the future. So, the excuses. Well, politicians are all the same. They're all crooks. I don't know anything about politics. None of it affects me anyway. I don't believe in the system. Or even worse, I don't have time. As far as I'm concerned, the absolute worst excuse is that my vote won't make a difference. So I'm not here today to tell you that politicians aren't crooks. There are some that are. I live in Montreal right now, and if you guys have watched the news, you will have seen that we've had a few resignations lately. I'm also not here to tell you that the system works. There are a lot of problems with our democratic system. But what I am here to tell you is that nothing will change if we don't engage in that system. Now, you should go out there. If you feel like you want to protest the system, protest it. If you want to challenge it, challenge it. If you want to change it, I encourage you to change it. But at the same time that you're doing that, I encourage you to also engage in the system. If we don't engage in the system, our politicians believe that we don't care. And when they think we don't care, they think they can get away with anything. And the system doesn't change when we are disengaged. So I'm going to start talking now a little bit about why your vote does count. Let me explain. 13. This is, according to Statistics Canada and Elections Canada, this is the number of ridings where Aboriginal electors in Canada, their population was greater than the margin of victory in the last election. So that means if those Aboriginal electors had all got out and voted, they could have been the deciding factor in those 13 ridings. And you know how many ridings the current governing party needed to win? Around 13 ridings. So they could have had a serious impact. In 4 ridings, Aboriginal people made up over 50% of the population, and in 29 others, they make up over 10% or more of the population. So a huge power block and a huge opportunity to really make their voices heard. 1. Ontario North, 1896. Liberal defeated a Conservative by 1 vote. Let's bring it forward. Kitchener City Council election in 2010. Frank Egrington defeated Debbie Chapman by 1 vote. 28. Out of 46,000 votes in Parry Sound, Muskoka, the Conservative candidate beat out the Liberal candidate by 28 votes. 80. Very recently, a little example from south of the border. The Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement has identified that in Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Florida, the youth vote was critical to who was going to win the election in the US very recently. In those states, if Governor Romney had won half of the youth vote, or if none of the young people in those states had gone out, or if they had all stayed home, then Romney would have won instead of Obama. Those states represent 80 electoral college votes, significant to make Romney the next president. So it was young people who just decided the US election. Numbers add up. And to just drive this point home, a little anecdote from Political Wire blog. I will read this out to you. Race ends in tie as candidate's wife doesn't vote. Bobby McDonald, you can imagine what that was like that night at home, learned the hard way that every vote counts. So they finished in a dead heat with the other candidate, 669 votes. But his wife, Katie, who works nights, didn't make it to the polls yesterday. You never think it will come down to 1 vote, but I'm here to tell you it does, he says. Numbers add up. There are 5.5 million young Canadians. That is a lot more than just 1 vote. That is enough numbers to wield some serious power. It's enough votes to scare the heck out of any politician you think is a crook. And honestly, it's enough votes for young people in Canada to take over. The problem is only 38.8% of young eligible voters took the time to show up last election. Numbers don't lie. Politicians listen to the numbers, but in order to get them to listen to you and to get them to listen to the issues that you care about and you're concerned about, you need to show up. So I am asking you today, I am asking you that when you turn 18, or if you are 18 already, show up to vote. Federal election, provincial election, municipal election, just make sure you vote. Now, you might be voting for somebody that you really care about and you think this person is amazing and they're going to represent me, or you might be voting for the best of the worst. But it is really important that you show up and vote. Ask your friends to vote. Get your roommate to go vote with you. Bring your parents to vote. And it doesn't just stop with voting. Once you have voted, we need to make sure that we are showing politicians that we are going to be around and pay attention to them in those 4 years in between elections. Democracy is more than voting, and whether you voted or not, and whether you voted for the person who won or not, you need to remember that politicians work for you. So, things you can do. Write a letter to your member of parliament or another elected official. The really cool thing is when you take time to actually write a paper letter, they assume that 1,000 other people think like you. That is an incredible power. When was the last time you got 1,000 people to do the same thing or to do one thing that you wanted them all to do? It's hard. But all you have to do is write a letter about something you care about to your elected officials, and they will assume that there are 1,000 other people who think the exact same way that you do. Join a political party. Only 1% to 2%, somewhere around there, of Canadians are members of political parties. So when you think about the fact that 60% of Canadians vote and only 1% to 2% are members of political parties, you can have an incredible impact if you join a political party, because that is where policy gets made. That's where they make the decisions about what they're going to talk about during an election campaign. And often it's the youth wing of political parties that have a huge impact on what that policy is. So if you want to have a real impact on what those issues are going to be during an election campaign, make sure to join a political party. Sometimes it's free. Sometimes it costs only $10. It can be an incredible way to make your voice heard about issues you care about. Or you can start a petition. It only takes 25 signatures to have a petition about an issue you care about raised by your member of parliament in the House of Commons. So if all of us here today had an issue we all cared about, and we all got together and we signed it, we could have all of our MPs raise it in the House of Commons. We have opportunities in our current democratic system, even if it's not perfect, to make a real difference. Voting can make a real difference, and so can making sure that you let your politicians know that you know they work for you, and and let them know that you're paying attention. Remember, your vote counts and your voice counts. So I really encourage you, next time there's a ballot box around, take the time to show up, and next time you see a politician, make sure that they know that you're paying attention. Thank you.